My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 46 years old, and for the last 16 years I've owned and operated Black Tide Diving, a dive charter and training company on the southern coast of Belize. I built it with my own hands after leaving the Navy, trading patrol missions and rigid command structures for coral reefs, wreck dives, and tourists chasing wonder beneath the surface. My wife, Elena, handled the books, the scheduling, and the office side of things. For more than 2 decades, I believed we had a strong marriage. I believed in routine, loyalty, and the quiet comfort that comes from thinking you know the person beside you better than anyone else in the world. Then one Thursday evening, everything cracked. I was in the garage rinsing salt from regulators and checking the seals on 2 tanks for a morning trip when I heard sharp heels clicking across the kitchen tile. Elena never wore heels in the house. She preferred flats, sandals, anything easy. When I stepped inside, she was standing in front of the hallway mirror in a dress I had never seen before. It was dark green, fitted, elegant, the kind of dress chosen for someone else's attention. I dried my hands on a towel and asked the most ordinary question in the world, the kind a husband asks without thinking, "Going somewhere special?" She turned to me and smiled, but there was nothing familiar in that smile. It wasn't warm. It wasn't playful. It was cool, amused, almost cruel. "I'm going out on a date tonight," she said, like she was telling me she needed milk from the store. Try not to be too jealous. For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. 23 years together, and she tossed that sentence at me with a smirk. I stood there staring, the towel still in my hand, while she picked up her purse and checked her lipstick in the mirror. She seemed entertained by my silence. Not ashamed. Not nervous. Entertained. I should have shouted. I should have demanded a name, an explanation, a timeline, something. Instead, what came out of my mouth was calm enough to make even me uneasy. "Hope you're ready to explain that to your sister tomorrow." Elena froze with one hand on the door. It lasted maybe a second, but I saw it. A break in the confidence. A flicker. Then she looked over her shoulder and asked, "What exactly is that supposed to mean?" I shrugged and told her to have fun. But it wasn't nothing. Her sister Nina lived a few blocks away, and lately Nina had been asking strange questions about Elena's weekly wine club, the one that somehow met 3 times a week for a group that barely discussed books and rarely posted photos together anymore. After Elena left, I sat in my chair in the den and stared at the wall for a long time. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was how casual she had been. How little our life seemed to mean to her in that moment. I poured myself a glass of aged rum and did what I had been trained to do years ago whenever panic threatened to take over. Slow down. Control your breathing. Study the situation. Build a plan before emotion makes you stupid. Underwater, panic kills. On land, it destroys judgment. By the time I finished that drink, I knew I would not confront her until I knew exactly what I was standing in the middle of. The next morning, Elena acted as if nothing unusual had happened. She hummed while making coffee. She asked whether I thought rain would ruin the weekend charters. She even kissed my cheek before I left for the marina. If I hadn't watched her walk out dressed for another man the night before, I might have questioned my own memory. But I am not a careless man. Navy life taught me discipline. Running a business taught me documentation. So the minute I got to Black Tide Diving, I started digging. Elena had always handled most of our finances because she claimed she was better with numbers and I was happier dealing with people and equipment. Turned out she was very skilled with numbers. She was also skilled at hiding what she was doing with them. I logged into our accounts and began tracing activity over the previous months. There were multiple large cash withdrawals, each one just small enough not to draw immediate attention. There were restaurant charges in places I had never been with her, hotel bills on the mainland, upscale boutique purchases, expensive luggage, jewelry, clothing far beyond anything she could justify from our regular household spending. My stomach turned cold as I followed the trail backward. It felt like descending too fast on a deep dive, when your body tells you something is wrong before your mind catches up. I called the bank and requested extended statements and supporting documents. Then I drove to one of the hotels that appeared repeatedly on the account. The front desk clerk was young, friendly, and far too casual when she recognized Elena's photo. "Yes, she's been here a few times," the clerk said. Usually with Mr. Dalton. They seem very close. The name hit me like a hammer. Trevor Dalton. I knew him. 3 years earlier, he had taken a scuba certification course with us. Mid-40s, newly divorced, overly charming, always flirting, always acting like boundaries were optional. I had thrown him out of the dive shop after catching him taking pictures of women changing near the rinse station. At the time, I thought he was just another creep with money. Now he was sleeping with my wife. Back at the marina, I made a call to an old friend from my service days. Marcus Hale had once dragged me out of bad water during a night operation, and years later I had returned the favor during a storm response. He now worked with a private investigative firm in Houston. When he answered, his voice was the same steady voice I remembered from the old days. I told him everything, from Elena's smug announcement to the hotel records and Trevor's name. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said the one thing I didn't want to hear but knew was right. Don't confront her yet. Not if you want the truth and not just a performance. If she's this comfortable, there's more going on than an affair. Gather documents, photos, financial records, communication patterns. Build the case before you show your hand. I told him this was my marriage, not a criminal operation. His answer was immediate. Daniel, your marriage may be the doorway, but whatever is happening here is already beyond the marriage. Right now, you're the only person in this situation who's underprepared. That night, I installed a discreet camera in the living room and another facing the side entrance. Not because I enjoyed spying, but because I needed protection. If Elena was willing to betray me this openly, I had no reason to assume she wouldn't lie about me too. She came home late again, claiming the wine club had run long. I asked how the discussion went. She barely met my eyes when she said, "Interesting topic tonight. Trust, relationships, betrayal." The irony almost made me laugh. Instead, I kissed her on the forehead and went to bed, where I stayed awake for hours planning the next steps. Marcus moved faster than I expected. By Sunday, he had called with news that changed the whole shape of the story. Elena wasn't just having an affair. She had been draining our assets. Quietly, methodically. She had helped arrange a second mortgage against my dive company using forged signatures and altered ownership documents. The amount was large enough to cripple the business if called in, and the money had already been moved through shell accounts and then out of the country. I sat at my desk gripping the phone hard enough to hurt my hand. I told Marcus it was impossible because I had signed nothing. He said she had help. Trevor worked with a coastal development firm that had connections to loan brokers and title processors, some legitimate, some not. "You're looking at fraud," Marcus said. "Professional-level fraud." That same evening, Elena came home carrying glossy shopping bags from luxury stores in Belize City. Designer clothes, new luggage, a watch so expensive she would never have bought it for herself if she thought I was paying attention. She spread the purchases across the bed like trophies. "A woman deserves nice things," she said when I asked whether there was some special occasion. Her tone made it sound like I had failed her by not funding a fantasy life. I asked, as calmly as I could, whether all of that had been expensive. She gave a lazy shrug and said, "We can afford it. Your little dive business has done well." My little dive business. The one she had nearly stolen from under me. I wanted to put every document in front of her right then and watch her try to lie her way out. But Marcus's advice held me in place. Don't move early. Don't give them time to destroy evidence. So I played the fool. I smiled. I nodded. I let her believe I still occupied the role she had assigned me. Loyal husband, hardworking provider, easy target. That night I called my attorney, Simon Rourke, another former serviceman who had traded uniforms for courtrooms. I explained the situation, and he didn't soften his response. "This is not divorce drama," he said. "This is criminal fraud, identity abuse, theft, and conspiracy. We need emergency action. We freeze what can be frozen. We secure your business. Then we involve the right investigators, not local friends of whoever she's mixed up with." By the end of the weekend, Simon had emergency motions in place to restrict transfers tied to my company and flag suspicious account movement. Around the same time, I learned something else important. Elena's mother, Margaret, knew absolutely nothing. Margaret called me herself, voice shaking, saying Elena had mentioned moving to Miami with a new business partner and had asked her for a large short-term investment. Margaret said the request felt wrong. She had always liked me, but I had never fully understood her until that phone call. I told her the truth. Not a softened version. Not a partial version. The whole thing. Trevor. The affair. The stolen money. The forged documents. By the time I finished, she was crying. Not the dramatic kind of crying. The broken, ashamed kind that comes when someone realizes their child has become capable of things they never imagined. Then she said something that changed everything. Tell me what I can do. Monday morning brought a revelation that blew the case wide open. Marcus called and said Elena had been meeting privately with a local detective named Owen Price. I knew the name. Price had a reputation. Nothing provable, just a trail of ugly rumors. Lost files, weak investigations, cases that somehow collapsed when the right people were involved. Your wife wasn't calm because she thought she could fool you, Marcus said. She was calm because she believed she had protection. If I had gone to local police first, Price might have buried everything. Instead, Simon used the interstate and international financial angle to push the case upward. 2 days later, I met with Special Agent Rachel Danner from a federal financial crimes unit in a cafe nearly an hour outside town. I brought every document I had collected. Account statements, hotel dates, property records, copies of suspicious filings, Trevor's connection to Elena, the timeline Marcus had built. Agent Danner read carefully, asked precise questions, and finally leaned back with a look that made my skin tighten. Mr. Mercer, you may have stumbled into a much larger operation. Your wife is part of it, but she may not understand how large. Trevor Dalton and several associates are already under quiet review in relation to property theft, financial laundering, and possible narcotics ties. I asked what that had to do with me. She said my dive company might have been chosen because it was stable, respected, and easy to leverage. Small business owners, trusted husbands, clean reputations. Those were the kinds of men this network targeted. The romantic betrayal was just the entry point. The financial theft was the real objective. Suddenly, the story stopped being about a marriage. It became a hunt. Agent Danner told me to act normal for a few more days. Elena, she said, would lead them where paperwork could not. That same night, Elena announced she would be leaving Thursday for a girls' spa weekend. She said it lightly, but I could see the excitement under the surface. I already knew it wasn't a spa weekend. It was an exit plan. She packed new clothes, hidden envelopes, bank account notes, travel confirmations, and, tucked carefully beneath a cosmetic bag, a false passport with her photo and a different name. Thursday morning, I kissed her goodbye and watched her drive away thinking she was headed toward freedom. The moment her car disappeared, I called Agent Danner. She's moving, I said. Then so are we, Danner replied. Stay near your phone. On Friday afternoon, Danner called with the final setup. They had intercepted communications between Elena and Trevor. The two of them believed they were celebrating before disappearing. They planned to meet at an oceanfront restaurant downtown. I told Danner it was only a few blocks from Margaret's house. She paused, then asked if Margaret could be trusted. I said yes without hesitation. Within an hour, I had spoken to Margaret and to Elena's brother Colin and his wife. Margaret agreed to invite Elena to an urgent family dinner by claiming she was worried about chest pain and wanted everyone together before a doctor's appointment. It was cruel in one sense, but it was the only way to ensure Elena showed up without suspecting what waited for her. That night, I arrived early at the restaurant and found Margaret, Colin, and his wife seated at a table near the windows. They looked tense, frightened, but resolved. When Elena walked in just after 7:30, she was expecting concern, sympathy, maybe panic about her mother's health. Instead, she found me seated at the table with her family and a stack of sealed document envelopes arranged in front of me. The confident expression she had worn all week vanished so fast it was almost shocking. "Daniel," she said, voice thinning, "what are you doing here?" I told her to sit down. She stayed standing for a second, clutching her expensive purse like armor. Margaret spoke first, her voice trembling but firm. "Elena, your husband has shown me things I cannot explain. I'd like to hear your explanation before anyone else says another word." I slid one envelope to each family member. Elena stared at them like they might catch fire. I asked where she had gotten the money for the new clothes, the luggage, the jewelry, and the travel arrangements. She tried to laugh it off. Then I said the number, the value of the fraudulent loan, the transfer dates, the shell accounts, the forged signatures. The color drained from her face. Colin opened his envelope and whispered her name like he no longer recognized her. She began saying she could explain, but I raised my hand and reminded her of her own words. "A few nights ago you laughed in my face and told me not to be jealous while you went out on a date," I said loud enough for nearby diners to hear. "I'm not jealous anymore. I'm past that. I'm disgusted that 23 years of my life meant so little to you." That was the moment the mask dropped. Not just the confidence, the whole performance. Before she could recover, Agent Danner approached our table with 2 federal officers behind her, badge visible. She addressed Elena by name and informed her she was under arrest for bank fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and participation in organized criminal activity. As the officers moved in, Elena looked at me with the first real expression I had seen on her face in days. Fear. Genuine animal fear. She asked if we could still fix it. I told her we might have fixed many things before she chose to burn down our life and help strangers rob me blind. The next morning, Agent Danner called while I was having coffee with Margaret, who had refused to leave me alone after the arrest. The operation was collapsing fast. Multiple arrests had been made, including Detective Owen Price. Elena had begun cooperating almost immediately. Through her statements and seized devices, agents were tracing accounts across several countries. Then Danner told me something I will never forget. Trevor Dalton had been planning to kill me. He intended to make it look like a diving accident, equipment sabotage, a faulty connection, an underwater emergency no one would question too deeply. Elena, according to Danner, had resisted that part. She had agreed to lie, steal, and run, but not to murder me. That resistance had created tension inside the group and accelerated their financial theft schedule. I sat there staring past the edge of the porch toward the water, trying to understand how close death had come to standing in my own kitchen wearing my wife's perfume. Later that afternoon, I visited Elena in detention. She looked older, smaller, less certain of her own face. She told me she had never agreed to the murder plan and had tried to force a separation instead, thinking divorce would make Trevor leave me alone. I asked why she hadn't told me the truth. She said she was afraid Trevor would kill both of us if she betrayed him. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. At that point, truth from her felt like broken glass. Still, when I looked at her, I no longer saw the woman I had married or the stranger who had mocked me in the hallway mirror. I saw someone who had made one rotten compromise after another until she was standing inside a nightmare of her own making. The prosecutor later told me she was facing a long sentence, reduced only if she cooperated fully. She said she would testify against all of them. It did not undo the damage, but it did matter to the families she could help save. A few days later, Marcus called again with better news. Most of the stolen funds linked to my accounts had been identified and frozen. International partners were moving to seize offshore assets. The fraudulent mortgage claim against black tide diving was voided. Insurance and emergency relief measures would cover much of the legal cleanup. For the first time in weeks, I felt air enter my lungs without resistance. 3 months later, I stood on the deck of one of my boats at sunrise, watching light spread over the Caribbean like fresh paint. Black tide diving was operating again. In fact, business was stronger than before. People trust survival. They trust character tested in public. Margaret had become one of the biggest reasons I stayed upright. She started helping in the office, answering phones, managing bookings, and quietly filling spaces in the day that grief would otherwise have occupied. One morning she called from the dock office window that I had a visitor. Walking toward me was a woman in her 30s in professional clothes with the alert posture of someone who gets things done. Her name was Claire Danner, Agent Danner's younger sister. She ran a nonprofit support network for victims of financial betrayal and romance-based fraud. She told me they were trying to organize recovery groups for people harmed by Trevor's network. Dozens of men had lost businesses, savings, retirement plans, homes, and in some cases the will to keep going. She asked whether I would speak to them. I said yes before she finished the sentence. My first meeting with the group took place in a community center in Belize City. 12 men sat in a rough circle, ranging from their mid-30s to late 50s, all carrying the same hollow look I had once seen in my own mirror. One man asked how I had known something was wrong. I told him the truth. I hadn't known. I had gotten lucky because Elena slipped. Another man asked how you trust again after betrayal like that. I told him trust does not come first. Verification comes first. Pattern comes first. Truth comes first. Trust is built later, slowly, and only with people whose actions remain steady over time. After the meeting, one of the men pulled me aside and asked whether it was true that my former mother-in-law had chosen justice over her daughter. I told him yes, and that when people show you they are willing to do the hard right thing instead of the easy loyal thing, pay attention. Those are the people worth building with. That night I called Margaret and told her about the group. She said she was proud of me for helping those men. I corrected her. We were helping them. Without her, none of it would have happened. When I hung up, I realized something had shifted inside me. The web of lies that had once surrounded my marriage had been replaced by something else entirely. A network of honest people doing difficult things for the right reasons. 6 months after the first arrest, I received a call that changed my life yet again. Commander Elise Rowan from the Coast Guard asked whether I would consult on an underwater evidence recovery case. Trevor Dalton, it turned out, had not limited himself to property fraud. His group had been using recreational dive zones and artificial reef sites to move contraband. They hid sealed containers underwater during legitimate tourism outings, then retrieved them later through trusted divers and corrupt contacts. The irony was almost unbearable. The same waters where I had spent years teaching families to breathe calmly and respect the ocean had been used as cover for drug transfers and weapons movement. I met Commander Rowan at the station that afternoon. She showed me sonar images and underwater photos of suspicious attachments fixed near reef structures and wreck fragments in areas I knew intimately. She needed someone who understood the currents, the common routes, the local dive community, and what normal underwater wear looked like compared with hidden tampering. For 3 weeks, I worked with federal teams while continuing to run Black Tide as normally as possible. We checked sites I had visited for years. We found hidden compartments, waterproof containers, and eventually 17 separate underwater caches containing narcotics, illegal firearms, and records. The biggest breakthrough came when we recovered Trevor's personal dive logs sealed inside a canister wedged behind a fabricated reef block. Those logs documented years of smuggling activity, coded payoffs, bribed port officials, and connections to corrupt police. Commander Rowan told me the evidence would help dismantle not just Trevor's cell, but a major section of the coastal trafficking chain. When I came up from that final recovery dive, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, purpose. What had nearly destroyed me had become the very thing exposing crimes far beyond my own life. That evening Margaret and I sat on the dock watching sunset burn gold across the water. She told me my father would have been proud. For a long time I said nothing. My father died while I was still in service, before he ever saw me build a business or grow into the kind of man I wanted to become. Maybe she was right. Maybe crisis had shown me more clearly than success ever could. I told Margaret I was thinking about expanding the company, not just with more boats and more charters, but with a victim support arm, investigative consulting, and underwater recovery services. She smiled like the idea had been waiting for me to catch up to it. A few weeks later, a local paper ran a feature about Black Tide Diving's role in helping break a coastal smuggling ring. Bookings doubled almost overnight. People wanted to learn from someone who had kept his head in deep water, both literal and figurative. More importantly, I had found a mission bigger than the business I originally thought I was building. A year after Elena's arrest, I sat in district court and listened to the final sentencing. Elena received a lengthy prison term for fraud, conspiracy, and organized criminal activity. Trevor Dalton received life without parole for murder conspiracy, trafficking, racketeering, and a long list of additional charges. Owen Price, the corrupt detective, received decades for obstruction, corruption, and criminal collusion. Margaret sat beside me with her hand on my arm while the judge read the final orders. The court acknowledged Elena's cooperation, but not enough to erase the scale of what she had done. When she looked back at me one last time before being led away, I felt no victory, only distance. She was no longer my wife, no longer even my enemy. She was a person who had made choices that wrecked many lives, including her own. After the hearing, Agent Danner found us in the corridor and told us the final asset recovery totals had come in. Most of the stolen money across all identified victims had been recovered. Not all, but enough to give many families a second chance. That afternoon, Margaret and I returned to black tide diving, which by then had grown beyond anything I once imagined. We were operating 3 vessels, employing multiple instructors, and holding contracts with both marine enforcement units and federal investigators for underwater consulting. Then Margaret surprised me again. She announced she had been accepted into a civilian investigative training program focused on fraud victim advocacy and support coordination. She was in her 60s and absolutely serious. I laughed in disbelief before realizing it made perfect sense. She had already proven who she was when the cost was highest. Later, I called Claire Danner to discuss formally integrating victim support services into the business model. She told me I was building something rare, a company that had survived a criminal attack and transformed itself into a platform for justice. She was right. Black tide diving was no longer just a dive center. It had become proof that decent people can be targeted, wounded, and nearly ruined, yet still come back stronger and more useful to others than before. 2 years after Elena's conviction, I stood on the deck of our newest boat, the True North, watching a new student go through her equipment checks. Her name was Maya Torres, a marine biologist who had lost her grant money to a romance swindler half a year earlier. She joined one of our support programs and decided to learn diving as part of rebuilding her life. She admitted she was afraid of panicking underwater. I told her fear is not the enemy. Fear keeps you alert. The danger comes when fear takes command. The goal is not to stop feeling it. The goal is to function clearly while it's there. Margaret stepped out of the cabin carrying updated certification paperwork. By then she had completed advanced diver training and her advocacy certification, making her one of the most respected people in our operation. Our company now offered something I had never seen anywhere else: dive instruction, underwater investigative support, and recovery services for victims of financial crime. We even launched a scholarship program that provided free dive training and small business mentoring for people rebuilding after fraud. The applications came in by the dozens. One evening, as Margaret and I reviewed them in the office, my phone buzzed with a message from Agent Danner. Another connected trial in a neighboring jurisdiction had ended in more convictions, and my testimony had helped. I set the phone down and looked around the office, the dock, the water beyond it, and thought about how completely life can change. Not long before, I had been a betrayed husband watching his marriage collapse under lies. Now I ran a business that helped others rise from similar wreckage while serving real investigations that protected people I would never meet. Then the doorbell rang. Margaret answered and came back holding an official envelope. Inside was a state commendation recognizing black tide diving for exceptional support in the fight against organized crime and in the recovery of fraud victims. There was also a recommendation for a federal partnership contract. I studied the letter for a long moment and then asked Margaret a question I had wanted to ask for months. "Do you ever regret helping me expose Elena?" She looked at me with the same steady strength that had carried both of us through the darkest part of the story and said, "I regret that my daughter became someone who needed exposing. I will never regret choosing what was right." We stood together on the dock as the last light faded, and for the first time in a very long time I felt something close to certainty. The sea had taught me that trust, like diving, demands preparation, courage, and the right people beside you. In the wrong hands, deep water becomes danger. In the right hands, it becomes discovery. And that is how the night my wife laughed in my face and told me not to be jealous ended up revealing a criminal empire, saving my life, and giving me a purpose stronger than the one I lost. If this story kept you hooked, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. And if you've ever had to rebuild after betrayal, remember this. Sometimes the thing that breaks your old life is the very thing that shows you what you're really made of.